We interrupt this record to bring you a special bulletin. The reports of a flying saucer hovering over the city have been confirmed.
Did you really go out with an alien? Uh-huh. What was it like? Real different.
Becoming Human, a Mork and Mindy podcast. Hello, listeners. This is Paula Scheffner with episode 26, Stark Raving Mork. This first aired on September 23rd, 1979. The IMDb synopsis is, Mork foolishly picks a fight with Mindy in order to kiss and make up. This was the 18th episode of Mork and Mindy that Howard Storm directed, and it was the 7th written by April Kelly. We start out with a sunny exterior of the house. Mork is in the kitchen with his new wave glasses and he's setting the toaster on the counter. He blasts it like we see in the credits. Mindy comes in from the bedroom looking shocked. Mork says that he's preparing for the future. He sings with sort of a southern accent, "When you throw me out with nothing but a fine-tooth comb," and I don't know what that's a reference to. She notices that he's planning to take a ski, a slipper, and half of the toaster. He says he reads the newspapers and watches the TV. When he leaves, he'll get half of everything she owns. He calls this the Marvin syndrome. This is a reference to Marvin versus Marvin, the so-called palimony decision that came down in March of that year. This was basically alimony for people who live together without marriage. Somewhat timely reference. Syndrome, I think, is like the China Syndrome, the 1979 movie about a nuclear power plant that I mentioned on a previous episode. Mindy points out that she would get half of everything Mork owns too. For instance, she would get half of his Billy Barty poster. He says that if she just took the top half, he would still have a poster. So this is a reference to a short entertainer who did not come up on the previous episode, surprisingly. She says she'll also take half of his 3 bags of sand, so that's a callback to the pilot where we learned that sand is a form of currency on Orc. Mork says, "Oh no, now it's alimony," because this is getting more serious.
Please, don't throw me out. I'll do anything you want. Anything. All right.
This is sort of just light and playful, and it's easily resolved, but it is a hint at the more serious arguments that they're going to have later in the episode. Mindy wonders why Mork is worried that she's going to ask him to leave. She wonders if she said or did something to make him think this.
I've been reading the statistics. I looked at the figures on divorce. And the odds are against any couple staying together forever.
Yeah, I know. I think that's kind of sad. It's probably because when people first get together, they're just crazy about each other. And then as time wears on, the excitement kind of wears off.
Well, I'm still crazy about you.
And I'm still crazy about you, too.
Good, then we have nothing to fear but sanity itself.
You've got nothing to worry about.
Mindy, promise me that things will always stay exciting for us.
Oh, Mork, I can't, because they won't. But I like to think of it as getting comfortable, not getting humdrum.
You know, what a coincidence. I used to play humdrum in my school band.
I bet you I bet you were great on the national anthem.
Well, the Organ anthem has no music. It's just 3 minutes of sucking through your teeth.
Yeah, well, you can't dance to ours either.
On episode 0, My Favorite Orkin, and also on Mork Returns, Richie Cunningham was referred to as humdrum, as in boring, but here it's turned into a musical joke. And I think it's interesting that Mork and Mindy are acting like they're a married couple, and to some extent they're treated that way in this episode, although it's never clear if it would be even accurate to describe them as boyfriend and girlfriend. It's still pretty ambiguous. But their body language is interesting because they are definitely connecting by holding hands and touching each other. She suggests that they get lunch, but Mr. Bickley has invited him to the new Italian restaurant at the mall. Mork says it's called Della Contessa. Mindy says she thinks that that's delicatessen, and with an Italian accent, he says that doesn't sound very Italian to him. It turns out that the delicatessen is owned by Mindy's girlfriend, as in female friend, Jeannie, and Jeannie's brother. Mr. Bickley took Mindy there and stuck Mindy with lunch. Mork jokes that he hopes she didn't have shish kebab, and then he does his bark laugh. Mindy says she has to go to class. Interestingly, she says she'll do her part to keep the relationship exciting. She'll make a romantic little dinner for 2 that evening. Mork says that his part will be putting a bomb in her cannoli. Couple things. One, the scene definitely, as I said, is ambiguous about whether this is a platonic friendship or romantic relationship, or if it's just somewhere in that gray area. Also, it's never explained how Mindy met Jeannie. I'm just going to assume that although Jeannie is in med school, as we'll find out, Mindy met her on campus. We do have this brief reference to Mindy going to one of her college courses. Then we get an exterior of the Boulder Mall showing the New York delicatessen. We can see from the scenic backdrop of the deli set that there are a couple stores across the way. One is sporting goods and one is someplace called Gilson's. Mork enters. The man that we will find out is Remo clatters the dishes in the kitchen. He calls the woman that we'll find out is Jeannie snippy, inconsiderate, ungrateful, and a chowderhead. She calls him ungrateful as well, and she says that he's an overbearing pea-brain.
We shouldn't have moved out here.
What do you mean? We had had the same argument in New York.
Oh, yeah? Well, there I could have given you a little pop. Here, I get arrested for violating your space.
Remo, remind me when I become a doctor to open up your skull and see what makes you thick.
So we find out that it's called the New York Deli not just because it's a New York-style deli, but because they moved here from New York. We're meant to find it humorous that he is threatening violence towards her. This is something that we see in Gary Marshall shows, that Italians are presented as more emotional and sometimes more violent. Gary Marshall himself was Italian. And we get a mention of her planning to become a doctor. There's a customer with a mustache and he tries to leave, but Jeannie grabs him and sets down his food and tells him to enjoy it. Then she goes over to a table. The customer with lines says that he wants bacon, lettuce, and tomato with coleslaw and a cup of coffee. So she orders 1 BLT, 1 slaw, and 1 Java, which is pretty straightforward restaurant slang. He's uncredited, but IMDb does list him as Michael J. Schwartz. He had a few small roles, like on Soap and MASH. It's not a real memorable performance, but it just rounds out the scene a little bit. Jeannie goes over to Mork, who has now sat down at the table nearest the door. He wants to ask her a question, so she hands him a menu and says everything's good. He says that's not his question.
Do all waitresses and cooks fight like you two?
Only when the waitress has a brother with all the class of a gong show reject. What would you like to eat?
Like a squealer and a honky, no goyim, and a side of Jeanne d'Arc's.
What?
Well, it's ham on white, no mayonnaise, with lots of French fries.
This is at least the second Gong Show reference. It's interesting that Mork uses ethnicities in his order. She says that his order is a number 3. He asks what the fighting was about. Even though they've never met before and she doesn't yet know who he is, she says that Remo was the last one out of the deli last night and he forgot to lock up. She says it's like he wants them to be robbed, so they have to close the deli and move back to the Bronx. He says, "You live with the Denver Broncos?" So that was kind of a cute little pun. Apparently Mork has not heard of all the boroughs of New York yet. Mr. Bickley comes in and says hello to Mork, and the audience applauds. Mork calls him Bickley, just in case we've forgotten who he is. And then he calls him Bick, my main grump, and asks him what's happening. Jeannie recognizes Mr. Bickley and asks what it'll be today. He orders fried chicken and a bowl of chili to go. Mork yells the order as chirp and a burp, hot shot, fire one. Jeannie doesn't argue with this and she walks away. Mork thanks Mr. Bickley for inviting him out to lunch. Bickley calls himself a prince, but obviously he's getting free lunches. In fact, Mork says that it seems like the waitress knows him, and Mr. Bickley refers to her as Jeannie and says she should know him because he's brought a new customer in there every day since they opened. Mork tells Mr. Bickley that Jeannie and the cook are having a terrible fight. Mr. Bickley says, "Great, I love floor shows." Mork says that he thought it was bad when you have a fight with someone you care about. Mr. Bickley says it's a great way to keep a relationship fresh and exciting. And there's a slight audience reaction as a few people pick up on the key phrasing. Mork says he and Mindy have never had a fight. They've had some misunderstandings. She has been mad at him at times. But yeah, they've not had a full-scale argument. Definitely nothing like we'll see in this episode. Mr. Bickley says he and his wife used to fight like cats and dogs.
She'd throw a plate at me, and I'd call her mother filthy names. And she'd slam my lips in a drawer. Boy, those were the days.
it's pretty clear that Mr. Bickley enjoys conflict, and he looks back fondly on his arguments with his ex-wife. Although I do wonder how his lips got into a drawer. Jeannie sets down Mork's number 3 and a bag of the chirp and burp. Mr. Bickley gets up, so Mork does too. Mork wonders if he and Mindy can keep their relationship exciting like Mr. Bickley and his wife. Mr. Bickley says that that's the best thing that 2 young kids could do, have a real rousing, knockdown, drag-out fight. And there's more audience reaction as people are starting to pick up on this terrible advice that Mork's getting. Mr. Bickley does say since they live upstairs from him, they should make it a quiet fight. Jeannie and Remo argue some more about who left the place unlocked. He says she left one of her stupid medical books in the kitchen and came back to get it. So she insults his dumb muscle magazines. He says these are physical fitness manuals. Remo starts grating cheese as they continue to argue. He says if she pushes him, he'll do what she hates. And he's not actually threatening violence. She tells him to go flex himself, as in flexing muscles. He says fingernails on the blackboard, and then he does it on their little order board. She flinches. He says he doesn't know why he's sending her through medical school. So there's a hint there that although they're arguing, he does care about her and he's supporting her career dreams. He wonders how she'll be able to look at a lung if she can't look at a blackboard. She says lungs don't squeak. He's gone back to grating cheese and he apparently cuts his finger on what he calls the dumb cheese grater. She calls him a big baby and says it's just a scratch. He says it's a gash. She says gashes almost always bleed. He says, give it a minute. And then she has him sit down as she tells him to be more careful. She puts a Band-Aid on his finger and gives him a bottled soda and a cup. She says she'll finish up, meaning finish up grating the cheese. He calls her short stuff and gently slaps her cheek, so she flicks his injured finger. She exits with the cheese and the grater into the kitchen.
You're staring at me.
Yeah, uh-huh.
You got some sort of problem, buddy?
Yes.
What's your name?
Mork.
Run that by me one more time.
Hey, you said Mork already.
Mork already, you Italian?
Astral Hatchling.
New York, the East Side.
Newark, Dark Side.
Hey!
So here and later we can see Mork mimicking Remo, not in a cruel way, but just because he likes to imitate people and he thinks Remo would be fun to imitate. Mork wants to ask Remo something personal. Remo wonders how personal it is, and Mork says it's about Remo's sister. Remo says forget it, she's a medical student. She'd only be interested in your pancreas. So I thought it was going to go in the direction of he's the overprotective Italian brother, but it didn't, at least in this episode. Mork says the 2 of them were fighting real hard, and then all of a sudden they stopped. He wonders why. Remo says he cut his finger and she's a sucker for blood. Mork says, oh, vampire, eh? Not your type? Oh? Remo says fights are a way to get rid of pent-up frustrations.
So these fights can be valuable.
Sure, you argue, and then you kiss and you make up.
Whoa. That sounds great. Who knows if you have a real big fight.
I think even at the time I found this a little bit weird because this subtext of kissing and making up and being your type and all that, and it's like they're brother and sister. Why would they want to kiss? But of course Mork is applying it to his own relationship with Mindy, and he wants to kiss Mindy. We get a nighttime exterior of the house, and Mindy is in the same outfit, so we know it's later that day. I think the whole episode is set in that one day. She's putting food on a plate. Mork opens the door and peeks in. Then he comes in and slams the door. She says he scared her to death. Then she comes down and she says that dinner is almost ready, and she talks about the sauce and the garlic rolls as he sits at the table.
You expect me to eat this slop?
What is going on?
What are you talking about? More of the same, deja slop.
What are you doing?
I'm putting your bones in orbit. Minnie, I'm tired of eating food that even the airlines have turned down. I've seen cockroaches go, no way!
I thought you liked my cooking.
You had a thought? I didn't think there was anything under that little Barbie doll hairdo of yours. Whoa, look, echo, echo, echo. Why don't you just shave it all off and get yourself a mohawk? That way it draw attention away from your nose.
My nose.
Are you kidding? It's Shiksa City. And your feet, whoa! Where'd you get your shoes, Barnum and Bailey? What's that wonderful fragrance? Oh, no, Old Spice. Ship ahoy, ship ahoy. Oh, no, maybe it's Indian leather. We like to make a fragrance from the cow that has been dead for 4 days and lying in the sun. Oh, Mindy, don't whimper. Makes you look like a little Pekingese with asthma. And it makes your eyes look even closer together than they are. Okay, it's your turn.
Oh, Mark, I just can't believe it.
Boy, this is gonna be great.
So we get another of Mork's deja vu jokes. He insults her cooking, her intelligence, and her hairdo, and then he refers to a mohawk, which was a fairly topical reference at that time. Punk mohawk hairdos were fairly new in the US. He refers to her nose as Shiksa City, which is kind of a carryover from the previous episode where he was snubbing her nose as he was acting out what had happened to her in the other dimension, or rather to Mandy. And that was where Jerry Looney said, "The Shiksa dies at noon?" Like I said, this thing of Mindy being a Shiksa has continued and will become kind of a runner. He also insults her feet, even though she doesn't seem to have particularly large feet. And her scent, which is getting really, really personal. Then he mocks her for whimpering, and he says that her eyes are too close together. I'll talk about this more later, but this just felt really out of character for Mork, even if he's misinterpreting what his friends have said. The Mork of the first season, even early on, was really moved by Mindy's tears, and it's hard to believe that he would find her crying something to be happy about, even if it's going to lead to kissing and making up. And I'll point out, neither Remo nor Jeannie was crying during their argument, and Mr. Bickley didn't say anything about crying, so Mork should realize that he's gone too far, but he doesn't. We get another nighttime exterior of the house, and it seems to be just a few minutes later. Mork is at her bedroom door calling her name. He says that that was the best fight he's ever seen. I don't know what other fights he's seen. I mean, we were told in the first season that Mork watched a lot of Earth television, so you'd think that he would have been familiar with the whole concept of arguing and kissing and making up and all that a long time ago, bleems ago. He asked if it was good for her too, as if arguing is like sex, even though she clearly did not enjoy it.
Come on now, it's time to kiss and make up.
Kiss and make up. I wouldn't kiss you if you were the only alien on Earth.
I think I am.
Well, there's your proof.
Oh.
So you don't like my cooking, huh?
Well,
Well, if you don't like it, why don't you get off your face and cook something for yourself? You don't know this. It's not that easy to be living with a monster from outer space. I mean, most guys just leave the cap off the toothpaste, right? You eat it.
Okay, fight's over. King's X.
Fights over my foot. So you don't like my hairstyle, huh? Well, Mr. Taste, where'd you get these rags? Fire sale at Disney World?
She didn't mean it. She didn't mean it.
Oh, and by the way, since we're into honesty, I'd like to inform you that your normal voice sounds like Truman Capote on helium. Hello, I'm Mork from Ork. Nanu, nanu, but you can just call me Space Turkey.
See, I'm cutting myself. Look. There's blood. There will be blood, bleed.
Mork, that's such a shame. We'll have to have that taken care of. I'll call the veterinarian.
Mindy, I think I've made a mistake.
You made the mistake.
Yeah.
I made the mistake. I should have listened to my father. I never should have let you move in here in the first place. If he told me once, he told me 1,000,000 times, Mindy, stick to your own species.
Well, Mindy, I guess I'll just go up to bed.
Go up to bed, my foot. There is an egg leaving in 10 minutes. Be in it.
Although it's kind of painful to watch Mork mock and insult Mindy and do it for fun, I have to say I liked Mindy telling him off. He really deserved it in this scene. I thought it was interesting that she says my foot twice. Mindy's not going to swear, especially on this show, but about as close as she's going to get. One of the most personal things she does is she insults and snaps his suspenders, and he has to tell them protectively that Mindy didn't mean it. She insults his normal voice, which we haven't heard in a while, and also his laugh. She says that she's going to call the vet. So we had that whole thing in the previous episode, and in Mork Runs Down about how Mork can't see human doctors. So of course now she's calling him an animal. I thought it was interesting that she says she should have listened to her father. One, it's a callback to Fred. At this point, we don't know if we'll ever see Fred again. And two, it's a reminder of how hostile Fred was to their relationship in the beginning, although he did mellow on that. She tells Mork that there's an egg leaving in 10 minutes and he should be on it, so it's like throwing him out so he catches the bus. Obviously, it's more complicated traveling by egg, as we've seen. He opens the chain door and says that his lips aren't that long, as in he can't kiss at her from that distance. Then we get a nighttime exterior of the deli. Remo in voiceover says that they're closed, but Jeannie lets Mork in. He says it's a matter of life and death. She says that if there was an accident, she's only studied below the knee. I don't think she would be interested in his pancreas yet. He says it wasn't an accident, but 2 people got really hurt, meaning himself and Mindy. Remo has him sit down, and Jeannie does too. Mork says that he lives with a beautiful, wonderful girl named Mindy. Apparently there aren't that many people named Mindy in Boulder, Colorado, or at least not in that neighborhood. Or maybe she's putting together that Mindy came in with Mr. Bickley, and then Mr. Bickley had lunch with Mork. Jeannie says, "Oh, I know Mindy. You must be Mork." Mork says that Mindy is fantastic for him, which is true, and he says they've never had a fight before. Then Mork saw the 2 of them having a fight, and he gives a quick recap. Mork is surprised to learn that you have to be mad to fight. He thought this was just a wonderful game, but now he's worried that he's ruined a wonderful thing. So a lot of the word wonderful in this scene. Mork wants Jeannie to negotiate. She can be like Kissinger. He'll be Sadat, and Mindy will be Begin, so somewhat topical. Jeannie says she'll go over and try to explain, so apparently she knows where Mindy lives. She tells Remo to explain to our friend, as she refers to Mork, about apologies, and then she exits. Remo sits down and introduces himself as Remo da Vinci. Mork says, "Oh, Leonardo's boy." Remo says, "Yeah, Leo's my pop," as if he has never heard of the artist Leonardo da Vinci. Just takes it literally.
Mork, when you like try and imitate me, you gotta understand something. You. I'm a complex type of guy. I operate on a whole bunch of different levels.
Kind of like a surgeon in an elevator.
See, when my sister and I yell at each other, we're not really mad. And sometimes when people fight, they go too far like you did. And then there's got to be an apology,
Remo's explanation doesn't really work because now it turns out that they weren't really mad at each other, even though they just told Mork that you have to be mad to argue. I think it would have worked better if he had said, sometimes you get mad at people you love, but you can work it through, rather than that explanation. Remo suggests that Mork apologize with flowers or candy, but then he realizes that it's late and the stores are all closed. He suggests Mork swallow his pride, take a deep breath, and say he's sorry. So Mork acts all of that out. Mork does an abject apology and says he's lower than snake spit, which is similar to comments he's made before. And Remo says that he forgives Mork, so Mork says they can kiss and make up, and Remo objects to this. So, in case you're wondering, yes, Mork is still bisexual. We get yet another nighttime exterior of the house. Jeannie and Mindy are talking. Jeannie says the fight was all her fault. Then she says it was Remo's and her fault. Then she says it was all Remo's fault. Mindy serves her cookies as Jeannie does yet another recap. When Mindy hears the part about keeping things exciting, she realizes what happened. Jeannie says that Mork is out there somewhere, trying to figure out how to apologize. So then we get a quick cut to Bickley's living room, and Mr. Bickley and Mork are on the couch. Mork says that he and Mindy had their first fight, so Mr. Bickley congratulates them. Mork says it was horrible. So then he gives yet another recap. Mr. Bickley thinks it was a good first fight, with a good beat, and it was easy to yell to. He'll give it a 7, which is a reference to the old record reviews that teens would give on American Bandstand. Mork says that Mr. Bickley knows more about fighting than anyone he knows, which is possible. I mean, how many people does Mork really know? Mork wonders how Mr. Bickley and his wife used to kiss and make up. Mr. Bickley says they never did. The argument started the day they married, and it went on for 15 solid years without a let-up. So I guess they didn't fight when they were dating? Or maybe just not as much.
Oh, then what happened?
One day she threw me out of the house, locked the door, and I never saw her again.
Mr. Bickley seems really nostalgic about his marriage and his divorce, which is a little bit disturbing. Mork nonetheless wants Mr. Bickley to help him with writing an apology. But Mr. Bickley doesn't believe in admitting you're wrong. As Mork takes notes in a little notebook, Bickley says he once said he just forgot an anniversary dinner. But in a tight spot, he uses natural disasters. There's another mention of his dislike of his mother-in-law. Mork wants a card, too. So they both get up and Mr. Bickley hands him an apology card. Mork thanks him. We cut back to Mindy's apartment. There's a knock on the door. Both women know that it's Mork. Jeannie insists that Mindy give the guy a chance to apologize. And then Jeannie and Mindy go into a Senor Wentz's Sarai door routine. Mindy opens the door and Mork hobbles in on crutches. He and Jeannie exchange knowing winks. Jeannie exits without saying goodbye to him. Mork groans and then he pretends that he had amnesia for 24 hours. She scoffs at this and he does a quick Born Again reference. He says that there was a tidal wave and then he slips into a surfer routine and he says, "Wow, Denver or bust." So another regional reference. Mindy points out that the nearest ocean is 1,000 miles away. Apparently, as the crow flies, it's about 877 miles, but driving distance is about 1,100. So I'll take that. 1,000 is reasonable. He says that there's a full moon, and he shows his hairy arm and says that he's a weremork, W-E-R-E, Mork. He wants to kiss and make up. She says she thought their friendship was built on honesty. She asks if he feels bad about making up these stupid stories. He says he should buy a house in San Clemente, which is a Nixon joke, and the audience reacts to that, of course. Mindy tells him to say what's in his heart, and then maybe they can kiss and make up. He says he has lots of ways to apologize. He grabs the big paper bag he brought in. He gives her a smaller bag of chocolate kisses and says they leave little brown hickeys. She accepts his apology, but he's not finished.
Here's a little card that Mr. Bickley wrote me. Hearing you're a sickly sailor, made my timber shiver. Hope you're getting over cirrhosis of the liver.
Mork, that isn't an apology card.
Well, and I saved the best for last time. I really misunderstood about fighting. And I didn't know those things I was saying would be so awful, and I never meant them. I'll never ever say them again as long as I'm here. Will you forgive me?
I forgive you, Mork. Now, have we gone through all the possible apologies?
Well, the 4 possible ways to apologize on Earth. But then, there are the 83 orca methods to apologize.
Mork, I forgive you.
Oh, no. I have to suck my teeth first. 10 courses of the Orca National Anthem. Then I have to beat myself with a canary. Then we have to go to Las Vegas and pretend my right arm is longer than my left.
Mork, I forgive you.
Oh, then we have to go...
Don't press your luck.
So we get another callback to the Orca National Anthem. And this isn't one of their longer or better kisses, but at least they've made up. We get one more nighttime exterior of the house, and Mork is summoning Orson. He calls him a great cosmic pachyderm. Orson says that the committee would like him to study the nuclear family. So again, one of these hazy references to either Orson's boss or the government. Not quite clear what the committee is in this case. Mork wonders if these are the people who have all the bombs, but Orson says it's a mother, a father, a sister, and a brother. You would have thought that Mork would have covered this already when he was explaining parents to Orson last season. Not every nuclear family has both a sister and a brother, or one of each. Mork says he's halfway there because he met a brother and sister who own a food factory called a delicatessen. They make wonderful things, yes, wonderful again, called sandwiches. Mork sent Orson today's special, pastrami on rye with mayo. Mork says that Remo and Jeannie were nuclear because they blew up and it caused a chain reaction. He and Mindy had a fight. Orson asks if they exploded and Mork says no, but they both got hurt. So then he gives yet another little recap. Orson wonders if Mindy clobbered him, so he's expecting violence. Mork says it wasn't a physical fight. It was words instead of punches, which can be much more painful. It's easier for a broken arm to mend than a broken heart, which is arguable, but okay. He signs off, and then he does the national anthem one more time. I remember being annoyed with this episode at the time. It wasn't like the premiere where it was just very disorienting. This is somewhat back on track of what Mork and Mindy is. As I said, it does feel out of character. It does feel somewhat regressive for Mork's knowledge and maturity and sensitivity towards Mindy. So I've got some issues with that. But on the other hand, it doesn't feel cringy in the same way as Mork in Wonderland. I measure each of these episodes on a 0 to 4 egg scale, which measures how well it fits what I'm looking for in the series. The previous episode was a 2. This, because it gets us back in Boulder and somewhat in a familiar setting, is a 2.5. I would have given a 3 if I felt that Mork's characterization was better. The introduction of Remo and Jeannie isn't bad. I think Jeannie comes across more sympathetically. The setting of a deli as compared to a music store, I think, actually has more potential, particularly since they never really did as much with the music store as they could have. It was just sort of occasionally customers would come in and they'd interact with them. With a deli, you pretty much have to have something going on, and there's more reason to drop by a deli on a daily basis than a music store. I think that Gina Hecht has reasonable friend chemistry with Pam Dauber. I can believe that they're new friends, getting to the point where they can joke with each other and give advice and so on. The J. Thomas, Robin Williams dynamic will take some work, but it's not bad here, and it's kind of cute how Mork imitates him and everything. I do think it's interesting that Jeannie blames herself, and then herself and her brother, and then her brother. Neither of them ever says, wait, Mr. Bickley, with his very dysfunctional marital history, is giving even worse advice. Nobody ever holds Mr. Bickley accountable, at least in this episode. I didn't find the episode especially funny. There were maybe a couple laughs. It wasn't painful. It was all right. And if you can get past the Mork characterization, it's a somewhat interesting plot, and it does resolve itself. I also rate these episodes on a 0 to 4 heart scale, which measures how shippy it is for the Mork and Mindy romance. And as I said, this is just an odd, ambiguous episode where they are compared to marital couples without being married, without actually dating. Mindy is hoping to prepare a romantic dinner, which Mork will quickly make unromantic. He really wants to kiss her, and he doesn't realize that it would be better just to be sweet as usual, and she'll kiss him anyway. I would say this is also a 2.5. The episode doesn't necessarily make me want Mork and Mindy to get together, but they have that potential, and, factoring in the past and so on. If you want, you can see this as kind of a bump in the road of their relationship. And as always, yes, it has somewhat platonic application, but not really. The guest star isn't particularly memorable. Mr. Bickley is used pretty well. I mean, he's sort of the devil on Mork's shoulder, with Jeannie a bit of the angel on the other. Mostly it takes Mindy to figure out how to get Mork back on track. It continues in a different way, the theme of Mork learning to become human. This would have worked better as a first season episode somehow, like maybe something about Fred and Cora arguing, although kiss and makeup thing would have felt even weirder, I think. But there could have been, Susan and one of her boyfriends or something. There could have been a way to do this in the first season, and it would have been more plausible. Still, if this was the direction that they were going to go with in season 2, I could see it working more than the strangeness of the previous episode. 2.5 eggs, 2.5 hearts. This is Paula Schaffner with episode 26, Stark Raving Mork. Nanu. Nanu.
I have a picture pinned to my wall, an image of you and of me, and we're laughing with love at it all. Look at our life now.